Donald adjusted the flame on the stove and watched the batter bubble on the cast-iron skillet. It was a Tuesday morning, a day that felt just like any other in the small but well-maintained suburban house he shared with his wife, Glenda. The smell of vanilla and sizzling butter filled the kitchen, a scent that usually brought a smile to his face, but today his stomach was tied in a knot of anxious energy. He flipped the pancake with a practiced flick of his wrist, landing it perfectly in the center of the stack. He wanted everything to be perfect this morning. Donald was a man of simple pleasures and deep loyalty. As a high school history teacher, he did not make a fortune, but he made a difference. He spent his days trying to get teenagers interested in the Industrial Revolution and the Civil Rights Movement, often staying late to tutor students who were struggling or just needed a safe place to be. He wore cardigans that had seen better days and drove a sedan that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. But he was proud of the life he had built. He believed in hard work, in kindness, and above all, he believed in marriage. He glanced at the clock on the microwave. 7:15. Glenda would be coming down the stairs any second now, and the timing had to be precise. He moved the plate of pancakes to the table, arranging the fresh strawberries he had sliced earlier with meticulous care. He placed the syrup in the small ceramic pitcher she liked, the one they had bought on their honeymoon 5 years ago. That trip seemed like a lifetime away now. Back then, they were both struggling, both dreaming, and they had been inseparable. Now things were different. The sound of sharp heels clicking on the hardwood floor signaled her arrival. Glenda swept into the kitchen like a storm front, her eyes glued to the screen of her latest model smartphone. She was dressed in a charcoal grey power suit that probably cost more than Donald's car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun, and the diamond studs in her ears caught the morning light. She looked beautiful, intimidating, and completely distant. "Good morning, honey," Donald said, putting on his warmest smile as he poured coffee into her favorite mug. "I made your favorite. Buttermilk pancakes with strawberries. I thought since you have that big trip today, you could use a good breakfast to start the day right." Glenda didn't even look up from her phone. Her thumbs flew across the screen as she typed out a furious email. She walked past the table, ignoring the steaming plate of food, and went straight to the counter to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. "I don't have time for a heavy breakfast, Donald," she said, her voice clipped and distracted. "David has me revising the merger proposal before I even get to the resort. If I eat all those carbs, I'll be sluggish all day. You know how intense these retreats get." Donald felt the smile falter on his face. He looked at the pancakes, the steam slowly dying down. He had woken up an hour early to make them. "Just a bite, then," he suggested gently. "You need energy. You've been working yourself into the ground lately. I worry about you, Glenda." She finally looked up, sliding her phone into her designer leather bag. Her gaze was not affectionate. It was impatient, bordering on pity. "I am not working myself into the ground, I am building a career," she said, snapping the lid onto her water bottle. "Something you might understand if you weren't so content with being mediocre. Look, I have to go. David is sending the car for me in 10 minutes. David. It was always David. David was her boss, the CEO of the investment firm where she had skyrocketed through the ranks over the last 2 years. David was everything Donald was not. He was wealthy, drove imported sports cars, wore bespoke suits, and commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. To Donald, David seemed arrogant and flashy, the kind of man who thought rules were for other people. But to Glenda, David was a visionary, a mentor, a god. "I just wish you didn't have to go on these retreats so often," Donald said, his voice quiet. "This is the 3rd weekend this month. We were supposed to go to the movies on Saturday." Glenda sighed, a long, exasperated sound that made Donald feel like a nagging child. "We have been over this, Donald," she said, checking her reflection in the microwave door and adjusting a stray hair. "This isn't a vacation. It is a strategic networking event at the Grand Oak Resort. It is where the real business happens. If I want to make partner by next year, I have to be there. David specifically asked for me to lead the presentation. Do you have any idea what an honor that is?" I know, Donald said, retreating to the sink to wash the unused pan. "I am proud of you. I really am. It's just that I miss you. We live in the same house, but I feel like I haven't really talked to you in weeks." Glenda checked her watch and then looked out the window. A sleek black town car was pulling into their driveway. "My ride is here," she said, grabbing her rolling suitcase. "Don't wait up for me on Sunday. I might have to stay late for the closing dinner. And please, Donald, try to fix the garage door while I'm gone. It is embarrassing that it gets stuck halfway up. David made a joke about it last time he dropped me off." She pecked him on the cheek, a quick, dry contact that felt more like a formality than a kiss, and then she was gone. The front door clicked shut, and the house fell silent. Donald stood at the window and watched her walk briskly to the car. The driver, a man in a uniform, opened the door for her. Before she got in, she paused and smiled at her phone, laughing at something she read. It was a genuine, bright laugh, the kind she used to share with Donald. Then she disappeared into the tinted back seat, and the car glided away. Donald sat down at the table alone and ate the cold pancakes. They tasted like sawdust. The rest of the day dragged on. At school, Donald tried to focus on his lessons, but his mind kept drifting back to the morning. He felt small. He felt like he was becoming a ghost in his own marriage, fading away, while Glenda ascended into a world of high finance and luxury that he couldn't touch. During lunch break, he sat in the staff room, grading papers. His colleague, an older math teacher named Mrs. Higgins, sat down opposite him with a sigh. "You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, Donald," Mrs. Higgins said, unpacking her sandwich. "Just tired," Donald muttered, circling a spelling error on an essay about the Cold War. "Glenda is away on business again." Mrs. Higgins hummed sympathetically. "That wife of yours is a rocket ship, but don't let her leave you behind on the launch pad, honey. Marriage is about walking together, not one running while the other stands still." Her words stuck with him. Was he standing still? He looked down at his worn-out loafers. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to do something grand, something to show Glenda that he could still surprise her, that he could still bring that spark back. Later that afternoon, as the final bell rang and students flooded the hallways, Donald was called to the principal's office. He walked in, expecting to be asked to supervise detention or organize the bake sale. Instead, the principal, Mr. Henderson, was smiling broadly. "Donald, take a seat," Mr. Henderson said, gesturing to the chair. "I have some excellent news. Do you remember that grant proposal you wrote last year? The one for the Historical Preservation Project?" Donald nodded slowly. "I remember. I thought it was rejected." "It was initially," Mr. Henderson said, sliding a check across the desk. "But the State Board reviewed the appeals. They loved your dedication. They not only approved the project funding for the school, but the grant comes with a personal stipend for the supervising teacher. That is you, Donald. It is a merit bonus for your years of service." Donald looked at the check, $5,000. It wasn't a fortune to someone like David, but to Donald it was a lifeline. It was more money than he had seen at one time in years. He stared at the numbers, his heart pounding. "Thank you," Donald whispered. "Thank you so much." He walked out of the school with the check in his pocket, feeling a sudden surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the sign he had been waiting for. He didn't need to fix the garage door. He needed to fix his marriage. He got into his rattling sedan and gripped the steering wheel. Glenda was at the Grand Oak Resort, only a 2-hour drive away. She had said she would be working all weekend, but surely she had to eat. Surely she had to sleep. What if he showed up there tonight? What if he booked a room, a nice suite, with this money, and surprised her with flowers and champagne? He could wear his best suit. He could take her to a candlelight dinner. He could show her that he wasn't just the boring teacher who made pancakes. He was the man who loved her enough to chase after her. The idea took root and blossomed instantly. It was impulsive, it was romantic, and it was exactly what they needed. He would drive up there, surprise her, and maybe, just maybe, David would see that Glenda had a husband who adored her, and he would back off with his late-night emails and weekend demands. Donald drove straight to the bank to deposit the check, keeping a few $100s in cash. Then he went to a florist and bought a massive bouquet of red roses, 24 of them, wrapped in elegant silk paper. He stopped at a jewelry store in the mall. He couldn't afford diamonds like the ones she wore, but he found a delicate silver necklace with a small sapphire pendant, her birthstone. It was simple and beautiful. As he got back into his car, the sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the parking lot. He felt a nervous flutter in his chest, a mixture of excitement and fear. What if she was angry? What if she said he was interrupting her work? He pushed the doubt away. No, no woman would be angry at her husband driving 2 hours to bring her flowers and jewelry. It was a grand gesture. He merged onto the highway, the city skyline fading in his rearview mirror. The drive gave him time to think, to rehearse what he would say. He would tell her that he didn't care about the money or the status. He just wanted her time. He wanted them to be a team again. The miles ticked by. He imagined the look on her face when he knocked on her hotel room door. She would be shocked, maybe a little flustered, but then she would smile, that genuine smile he had missed this morning. She would invite him in, and they would order room service and talk for hours like they used to. As he approached the exit for the Grand Oak Resort, night had fully fallen. The resort was located in a secluded valley, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. It was a place for the elite, a sanctuary of wealth and privacy. Donald turned off the main highway and onto the winding private road that led to the hotel. The trees loomed tall on either side, their branches forming a tunnel over the road. He reached the security gate at the entrance. A guard in a booth leaned out, looking skeptically at Donald's old sedan. "Name?" the guard asked, his voice bored. "Donald Evans," Donald said, trying to sound confident. "I'm here to see my wife, Glenda Evans. She is a guest here." The guard checked a clipboard, running his finger down a list. "I don't see a Glenda Evans on the primary guest list. Which group is she with?" "She is with the Sterling Capital Group," Donald explained. "With David Sterling." "Ah, the Sterling party," the guard said, his demeanor changing slightly, though his eyes still held a trace of condescension. "They have the entire West Wing penthouse floor. Go ahead. Park in the visitor lot around the back. The front valet is full." "Thank you," Donald said. He drove past the gate and up the long, lit driveway. The resort emerged from the darkness like a palace. It was a sprawling structure of stone and glass, glowing with golden light. Expensive luxury cars were lined up at the entrance, Porsches, Bentleys, Ferraris. Donald felt a pang of insecurity as he steered his noisy car toward the back lot, parking between a dumpster and a delivery van. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He smoothed his hair and straightened his tie. He grabbed the bouquet of roses and the small velvet box containing the necklace. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out into the cool night air. He walked around to the front entrance, the gravel crunching under his shoes. His heart was hammering against his ribs. This was it. He was going to save his marriage. He walked through the massive revolving glass doors and into the lobby. The lobby was breathtaking. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, crystal chandeliers hanging from a ceiling that seemed miles high, and soft jazz music playing from invisible speakers. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns stood in small clusters, holding champagne flutes and laughing softly. Donald felt woefully underdressed in his corduroy jacket and slacks, but he held his head high. He was here for his wife. He approached the reception desk. A young woman with a perfectly practiced smile looked up at him. "Good evening, sir. How may I assist you?" she asked. "Hi, I am looking for my wife, Glenda Evans," Donald said, resting the heavy bouquet on the counter. "She is with the Sterling Capital Group. I wanted to surprise her." "Could you tell me what room she is in?" The receptionist typed something into her computer, her perfectly manicured nails clicking softly on the keys, her brow furrowed slightly. "I have the Sterling Group in the penthouse suite A and several adjacent executive rooms," she said slowly. "But I don't see a room specifically registered to a Glenda Evans." Donald frowned. "That doesn't make sense. She is one of the top executives. She has to have a room." "Maybe it is under the company name." The receptionist scrolled further, her eyes scanning the screen. Then she stopped. She looked up at Donald, and for a split second, her professional mask slipped. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion or perhaps realization. She glanced at the flowers, then back at Donald. "Sir, the suite bookings are comprehensive. Most of the team is in the shared executive quarters, but Mr. Sterling is in the master penthouse. Perhaps she is in a meeting there." Donald felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. A meeting? Yes, of course. It was late, but Glenda worked late. "Can you just give me a key to the room she is staying in? Or tell me the number? I don't want to interrupt the meeting if I can help it. I'll just wait in her room until she is done." The receptionist hesitated. She looked uncomfortable. "Sir, for security reasons, I cannot give out keys to unregistered guests. However, if she is part of the Sterling party, they are all located on the 12th floor. The elevators are to your right. She didn't give him a room number. She didn't give him a key. She just wanted him to leave the desk. Donald sensed her hesitation, but he chalked it up to the strict rules of a high-end hotel. "Thank you," he said, picking up the flowers. He walked to the elevators, pressing the button for the 12th floor. As the doors closed, he caught the receptionist watching him. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was reaching for the phone. The elevator rose smoothly, silently. Donald's stomach dropped with every passing floor. Why wasn't her name on the registry? Maybe David paid for everything, so it was all under his name. That made sense. Corporate expenses. He was overthinking it. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 12th floor. The doors slid open. The hallway was dimly lit and plush, with thick carpet that swallowed the sound of his footsteps. It was quiet. Too quiet. There was no sound of a party, no sound of a conference. He walked down the corridor, checking the numbers. 1201, 1202. These were regular rooms. At the end of the hall there was a set of double doors made of dark mahogany. A golden plaque read, "Penthouse Suite, Royal Oak." That had to be it. If the team was meeting, they would be in the biggest suite. He approached the double doors. He raised his hand to knock, clutching the roses in his other arm. He imagined Glenda's face. He imagined her surprise. But before his knuckles could graze the wood, he heard a sound. It wasn't the sound of a PowerPoint presentation. It wasn't the sound of market analysis or merger discussions. It was laughter, but not the polite laughter of a business dinner. It was loud, raucous laughter. A man's deep, booming laugh, followed by a woman's giggle. A giggle he knew better than his own heartbeat. Donald froze. His hand hovered in the air, inches from the door. "Oh, David, stop it!" Glenda's voice rang out, clear and muffled only slightly by the wood. "You are terrible." The man's voice, David's voice, responded, dripping with arrogance. "I am not terrible, Glenda. I am simply a man who knows what he wants. And I think we both know I get what I want." Donald's breath caught in his throat. He stood there in the hallway, the heavy scent of the roses suddenly making him nauseous. He shouldn't be hearing this. They were just joking. They were just colleagues blowing off steam. Then came the sound that shattered his world, the sound of glass clinking, followed by a low, intimate murmur. And then Glenda speaking again, her voice husky and different, a tone she hadn't used with Donald in years. "You know, Donald thinks I am in a seminar right now," she said. "He actually made me pancakes this morning. Can you believe it? Pancakes. He is so simple." David laughed again, a cruel, mocking sound. "He sounds like a useful pet. Keeps the house warm while the adults play." Donald's grip on the flowers tightened until the thorns dug into his palm, piercing the skin. He didn't feel the pain. He only felt the cold, crushing weight of reality crashing down on him. He stood paralyzed outside the door, the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging from the handle, mocking him in the dim light. He had driven 2 hours to surprise his wife, but the surprise was on him. Donald stood in the hallway like a statue carved from misery. The muffled sounds from behind the mahogany doors continued, each giggle and murmur acting like a chisel, chipping away at the foundation of his life. He could feel his heart slamming against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but his feet refused to move. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to run, to leave this place and never look back, but a morbid, self-destructive curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. He needed to know the extent of it. He needed to know just how much of a lie his life had become. Inside the suite, the voices grew clearer as they moved closer to the door, perhaps grabbing another drink from the minibar. "You really should just leave him," David said, his voice smooth and commanding. "It is pathetic, Glenda. You are a vice president at a major firm. You are wearing a $5,000 watch. And you go home to a man who grades papers for a living and drives a rust bucket. It doesn't fit the brand. It is not that simple," Glenda replied, and Donald strained to hear any defense of him in her tone. He waited for her to say that she loved him, that money didn't matter. Instead, he heard the clinking of ice in a glass. "He is safe, David. He is a safety net. If everything goes wrong, if the market crashes, if I lose my standing, Donald is there. He is loyal like a dog. And besides, the house is in both our names. If I divorce him now, he gets half. Do you know how much equity we have in that place? I'm not handing him a check for $200,000 just to get rid of him. I will wait until I get my bonus next quarter, Stash it in the offshore account you set up, and then I will figure out how to cut him loose without losing a dime." The air in the hallway seemed to drop 20 degrees. Donald felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a moment of weakness or passion. It was a calculated, cold-blooded financial strategy. She wasn't staying with him out of love. She was staying with him because he was an insurance policy that was too expensive to cancel yet. David laughed again, a low, rumbling sound. "You are ruthless, Glenda. That is why I like you. That is why you are going to go far in this company. Emotions are for poor people." "Exactly," Glenda purred. "Now, stop talking about my husband. He is probably asleep in his recliner with the television on, dreaming about his little history lessons. Let's focus on us." The sounds that followed were unmistakable. The heavy thud of a glass being set down, the rustle of clothing, the soft, breathless sighs that Donald hadn't heard in his own bedroom for months. A wave of nausea rolled over Donald, so violent he almost doubled over. The bouquet of red roses in his hand felt heavy as lead, the thorns digging deeper into his palm, drawing a single drop of blood that smeared against the velvet ribbon. He raised his hand, his fist clenched, ready to pound on the door. He wanted to scream. He wanted to break the door down and confront them, to smash David's arrogant face and scream at Glenda until his throat bled. He wanted to show them he wasn't a dog. He wasn't a pet. But his hand stopped inches from the wood. He froze. His breathing was ragged, but his mind suddenly snapped into a terrifyingly clear focus. If he knocked on that door right now, what would happen? David Sterling was a billionaire. He had security guards, lawyers, and influence that Donald couldn't even comprehend. If Donald caused a scene, he would be the one dragged away in handcuffs. He would be the crazy, jealous husband interrupting a business meeting. Glenda would spin it. She would say he was unstable. They would destroy him. And worse, they would know he knew. If they knew he was aware of the betrayal, they would accelerate their plans. Glenda would hide the money faster. She would file for divorce before he could protect himself. She would leave him with nothing, just as she planned. He lowered his hand. The adrenaline that had urged him to fight transformed into a cold, hard resolve. He looked at the door one last time, burning the image of the room number into his memory. Penthouse suite. Royal oak. He wouldn't forget. He turned around slowly, his movements stiff and mechanical. He walked back down the plush hallway, the sound of his own footsteps absorbed by the carpet. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. When the door slid open, he stepped inside, alone with his reflection in the mirrored walls. He looked at himself. He saw a man in a corduroy jacket holding a bouquet of dying dreams. He looked old. He looked tired. But in his eyes, there was something new, a spark of cold fire. The elevator descended, carrying him back to the lobby. When the doors opened, he walked out, his gaze fixed on the floor. He passed the reception desk. The young woman who had helped him earlier was on the phone, but she paused as he walked by. She saw the flowers still in his hand. She saw the devastation etched into the lines of his face. She didn't say a word. She just lowered the phone slightly and looked at him with an expression of profound pity. She knew. The staff always knew. She probably saw David bring women up there every weekend. She probably saw Glenda arrive with him. To her, Donald was just another casualty of the resort's dirty secrets. Donald couldn't bear her gaze. He walked faster, pushing through the revolving doors and out into the cool night air. The valet stand was bustling with activity. A couple in evening wear was laughing as they waited for their Ferrari. Donald walked past them, head down, trudging toward the dark back lot where his car was hidden. He reached his sedan and unlocked it. He opened the back door and tossed the roses onto the seat. The petals scattered, red like blood against the grey upholstery. He threw the velvet box with the sapphire necklace next to them. It tumbled onto the floor mat, a forgotten trinket. He got into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The silence of the car wrapped around him. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He stared at the dashboard, at the little odometer that showed over 150,000 miles. He let out a scream. It started as a low groan and erupted into a guttural roar that tore at his throat. He screamed until his lungs burned. He slammed his hands against the steering wheel, hitting it again and again until his palms stung. Tears streamed down his face, hot and fast, blurring his vision. "Why?" he sobbed, his voice cracking. "Why, Glenda?" I gave you everything. He cried for 10 minutes. He cried for the 5 years of marriage. He cried for the pancakes he made that morning. He cried for the stupid, naive hope that had brought him here. But then, the tears stopped. As quickly as the storm had come, it vanished, leaving behind a barren, desolate landscape. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He started the engine. The car sputtered to life, a stark contrast to the purring engines of the luxury cars in the front lot. Donald put the car in reverse and backed out. He drove down the long, tree-lined driveway, passing the security gate without looking at the guard. The drive home was a blur. The highway stretched out before him, a ribbon of darkness. He didn't turn on the radio. He needed the silence to think. He needed to process what he had heard. She plans to leave me when she gets her bonus. She is hiding money in an offshore account. She thinks I am simple. She thinks I am safe. The words looped in his mind like a broken record. They were painful, but they were also data. Valuable data. She thought he was a fool. She thought he was asleep in his recliner. That was his advantage. If she thought he was stupid, he would be stupid. If she thought he was loyal, he would be loyal. He would play the role she had cast him in, right up until the moment he flipped the script. He arrived back at his house just after midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the manicured lawns. He pulled into the driveway and looked at the house. It was a nice house, a 2-story colonial with white shutters. They had bought it 3 years ago, using mostly his savings for the down payment, because Glenda had said her money was tied up in investments. He realized now that tied up in investments probably meant hidden in her private accounts. He walked to the front door, his keys jingling in his hand. He hesitated before unlocking it. Entering the house felt like re-entering the stage of a play. This wasn't his home anymore. It was a set. And he was an actor. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale. The faint smell of vanilla from the morning still lingered, a ghostly reminder of the husband he had been just 16 hours ago. He locked the door behind him and leaned against it, closing his eyes. His pocket buzzed. He pulled out his phone. A text message from Glenda. "Hey, sweetie. Just got back to my room. The meetings went so late. I am exhausted. Miss you. Hope you had a good night. Love you." Donald stared at the screen. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She wasn't back in her room. She was likely still in the penthouse, in David's arms, laughing about the pet husband. He felt a flare of anger, but he pushed it down. He couldn't react. He couldn't be passive-aggressive. He had to be Donald, the simple, loving Donald. He typed a reply, his fingers trembling slightly. "Glad you are done. Get some rest. I miss you too. Good night." He hit send. He walked into the kitchen. The plate of cold pancakes was still sitting on the table where he had left it. The strawberries had turned mushy and dark. He picked up the plate and scraped the food into the trash can. He washed the plate, dried it, and put it away in the cupboard. He walked through the living room, checking things as if seeing them for the first time. The expensive leather sofa she had insisted on. The massive television she barely watched. The art on the walls that she had picked out to impress her friends. It was all her. He was just a guest in her life, a caretaker for her things. He went upstairs to their bedroom. He turned on the light and looked at the bed where they slept, the bed where he thought they were building a life. He walked over to her side of the room. Her vanity was covered in expensive creams and perfumes. He opened the top drawer of her nightstand. It was messy. Receipts, hair ties, a few paperback novels. He dug a little deeper, moving the books aside. At the back of the drawer, buried under a stack of old magazines, he felt something hard and cold. He pulled it out. It was a second phone. A burner phone. He tried to turn it on, but it was locked with a passcode. He stared at the black screen. This was how she communicated with David. This was where the secrets were. He put the phone back exactly where he found it. He couldn't take it yet. If she noticed it was gone, she would know he was suspicious. He needed the code. He needed access. He went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at himself in the mirror. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his jaw was set. "You are not a victim," he whispered to his reflection. "You are a historian. You study wars, you know how empires fall. They fell from within. They fell because of arrogance. They fell because they underestimated the enemy at the gates. Glenda and David were the empire. They were powerful, rich, and arrogant. But they had a weakness. They thought they were untouchable, and they had let the enemy inside the walls. Donald walked back into the bedroom. He didn't get into the bed. He couldn't bear to lie on the sheets where she slept. Instead, he went to the guest room down the hall. He stripped off his clothes and lay down on the small, firm mattress. He didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing, plotting. He needed to know everything. He needed to know about the offshore accounts. He needed to know about the company fraud. He needed proof. Tomorrow, the sad husband would die. Tomorrow, the investigator would be born. He would smile. He would text her good morning. He would ask about her seminars. And while she was playing her game, he would start playing his. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in hours, a grim smile touched his lips. "Enjoy your weekend, Glenda," he thought, "because it is going to be your last happy one." Donald rolled over and pulled the blanket up to his chin. The silence of the house was no longer lonely. It was the heavy, pregnant silence before a storm. And Donald was ready to be the thunder. The sun rose on Sunday morning, casting a pale grey light across the guest room floor where Donald lay awake. He had not slept for a single minute. His eyes felt gritty and his body ached as if he had run a marathon, but his mind was vibrating with a terrifying clarity. The paralysis of the night before was gone. The shock had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve that settled in his chest like a stone. He was no longer the confused husband. He was a man under siege, and he needed to secure his perimeter. He sat up and checked his phone. It was 7 in the morning. Normally, on a Sunday while Glenda was away, he would sleep in, maybe read a book, and wait for her to call him when she woke up. But today was a work day, the most important work day of his life. He composed a text message. He typed it out slowly, ensuring every word sounded like the old Donald, the naive Donald. "Good morning, honey. I hope you slept well. I am just heading out to the grocery store to get some things for the week. Do you think you will be home for dinner tonight? I can make a roast." He read it over twice. It was perfect, mundane, domestic, and completely non-threatening. He hit send. He went downstairs and made coffee. The ritual of grinding the beans and pouring the water centered him. He needed the caffeine. As the pot brewed, his phone buzzed. It was Glenda. "Morning, sweetie. The seminar starts early today, so I am rushing. I am so sore from the hotel bed. It is terrible. I should be home by 6. Don't worry about a big dinner, maybe just a salad. Love you." Donald stared at the word, sore. He knew exactly why she was sore, and it wasn't the mattress quality at a 5-star resort. A fresh wave of nausea rolled in, but he swallowed it down with a gulp of black coffee. She was rushing. That meant she would be distracted. That meant he had at least 8 hours before she returned. He put the phone down on the counter and looked toward the locked door of Glenda's home office. It was a room he rarely entered. She called it her command center, and she always insisted on privacy because of sensitive client data. He had always respected that. He had respected her boundaries because he trusted her. He walked to the utility drawer in the kitchen. He rummaged through the loose batteries and rubber bands until he found a small brass key. It was the master key for the interior doors of the house. He had put it there when they moved in and never used it. He hoped Glenda had forgotten it existed. He walked to the office door and inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying click. Donald pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled like her perfume and the sharp scent of ozone from the laser printer. It was immaculate. Her glass desk was organized with military precision. A laptop stand, a second monitor, and a neat stack of files. He sat down in her leather chair. It felt wrong, like he was trespassing, but he reminded himself of the conversation he had heard through the hotel door. She was planning to leave him with nothing. She was planning to steal his future. This wasn't trespassing, this was self-defense. He started with the physical files. He opened the drawers. They were mostly filled with work documents, glossy brochures about investment funds, and tax returns from previous years. He flipped through the tax returns. They looked normal. The joint income was reported correctly. But then he found a thick manila folder at the back of the bottom drawer. It didn't have a label. He opened it. Inside were bank statements, but not from their usual bank. These were statements from a bank in the Cayman Islands and another from a holding company in Delaware. He scanned the numbers. The deposits were staggering. $10,000 here, $15,000 there, monthly transfers that added up to hundreds of thousands over the last 2 years. Donald frowned. Where was this money coming from? He looked at the withdrawal columns on their joint account statements, which he pulled up on his phone. He compared the dates. Every time a large sum left their joint savings or his personal account, a matching amount appeared in these hidden accounts a few days later, usually filtered through a third party called Consulting Solutions LLC. She wasn't just hiding her bonus. She was siphoning their life savings. The money he thought was going into mutual funds, the money for their retirement, the extra payments for the house principal. It was all being funneled out. She was stealing from him. She was slowly draining him dry so that when she left, the joint accounts would be empty and her private stash would be untouchable. His hands shook as he turned the page. He found credit card statements in his name, cards he had never applied for. They were maxed out. $50,000 in debt on one, $30,000 on another. The charges were for luxury items, handbags, spa treatments, jewelry. She was buying the lifestyle she flaunted in front of David Sterling, and she was putting the debt in Donald's name. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This was worse than an affair. This was financial murder. If she filed for divorce tomorrow, he wouldn't just be heartbroken. He would be bankrupt. He would lose the house. He would be buried under debt he couldn't pay on a teacher's salary. He needed to document this. He took photos of every page with his phone, making sure the text was clear. He photographed the account numbers, the dates, the LLC names. He turned to her computer. It was password protected. He tried her birthday. Incorrect. He tried their anniversary. Incorrect. He tried the name of her first pet. Incorrect. He paused, thinking back to the hotel. David. Everything was about David. He typed in David, incorrect. He typed in Sterling, incorrect. He sat back thinking. What was the date she started working for him? It was 2 years ago, August 12th. He remembered because they had gone out to celebrate her hiring. He typed 082. The screen flashed red. Incorrect. He took a deep breath. He looked around the desk for a clue. There was a sticky note on the monitor with a list of tasks. Review merger. Call HR. Audit. Nothing useful. Then he saw it. A small framed photo on the corner of the desk. It wasn't a photo of Donald. It was a photo of the team at the retreat last year. Glenda was standing next to David, beaming. In the background there was a yacht. The name of the yacht was visible in gold letters. The Ambition. He typed, Ambition. The screen unlocked. Donald felt a sick sense of victory. He was in. He didn't go to her work email. That would be encrypted and monitored. He went to her browser history. He went to her personal email, which was still logged in. He clicked on the Sent folder. Hundreds of emails to David Sterling. But they weren't just love letters. They were business discussions mixed with intimate details. He scrolled through them, his eyes scanning for keywords. Then he found something that made him pause. An email thread from 3 months ago with the subject line, Project Fallout. He clicked it. David. I have signed off on the risk assessment for the pension fund transfer. The auditors are asking questions about the valuation of the assets. I told them what you said, that the volatility is temporary. But I am worried. If this goes south, my signature is on everything. Glenda. David's reply was short. Don't worry, G. You are doing great. The board trusts you. Just keep the auditors happy until the quarter closes. Once the merger happens, the debt disappears. Trust me, we are in this together. Donald read it again. My signature is on everything. He opened a new tab and searched for Sterling Capital Pension Fund news. The results were standard financial news, but there were a few blog posts from industry watchdogs rumoring about instability. Donald sat back, his mind racing. He was a history teacher. He knew how power worked. He knew about scapegoats. David Sterling wasn't just sleeping with Glenda. He was using her. He was getting her to sign off on illegal or highly risky financial moves. If the company crashed, or if the fraud was discovered, David's hands would be clean. He would point to the documents. He would point to Glenda's signature. She would go to prison. Donald felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes. Betrayal, absolutely. But also a dark, ironic pity. Glenda thought she was a queen in the making. But she was just a pawn being moved into the line of fire. He needed help. He couldn't handle this alone. He knew history, but he didn't know forensic accounting or criminal law. He needed a professional. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He stopped at a name he hadn't called in years. Vince. Vince was an old college buddy who had dropped out of the history program to join the police force. He had spent 10 years as a detective before burning out and opening his own private investigation firm. Vince was cynical, expensive, and brilliant. Donald dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Evans? I haven't heard from you since the reunion. Everything okay?" "No, Vince. Everything is not okay," Donald said, his voice steady. "I need to hire you. Immediately." Vince didn't ask questions. He just gave an address. "Be here in an hour. Bring whatever you have." Donald spent the next 45 minutes printing everything. He printed the bank statements, the emails, the credit card bills. He downloaded the files to a flash drive. He wiped his fingerprints from the desk. He locked the computer. He placed the key back in the utility drawer exactly how he found it. He left the house, carrying a backpack filled with the evidence of his wife's betrayal and her impending doom. Vince's office was in a strip mall on the bad side of town, sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a liquor store. The blinds were drawn and the air inside smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Vince was a large man with a shaved head and eyes that had seen too much of the worst of humanity. He sat behind a cluttered desk, listening as Donald laid it all out. Donald told him everything. The surprise trip, the overheard conversation, the pet comment, the offshore accounts, the email about the pension fund. Vince didn't interrupt. He just took notes on a yellow legal pad. When Donald finished, Vince sat back and whistled low. "You walked into a buzzsaw, Donnie," Vince said. "This isn't just a divorce case. This is federal crime territory." Vince picked up the printout of the email. "I know David Sterling," Vince said, tapping the paper. "Not personally, but I know the type, and I know the rumors. He is a shark. But he is a specific kind of shark. He feeds on ambitious women." "What do you mean?" Donald asked. Vince turned his computer monitor around. He brought up a series of news articles. "Look at this. 5 years ago, Sterling Capital CFO, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, fired for embezzlement, sued by the company. She claimed she was following orders. She lost everything. Look at this one. 3 years ago, VP of Operations Jessica Thorne, investigated for insider trading. She signed the trades. Sterling walked away clean." Vince looked at Donald. "He has a pattern, Donnie. He finds someone smart, hungry, and a little bit insecure. He seduces them. He makes them feel special. He puts them in a position of power. And then he hands them the loaded gun and tells them to pull the trigger. When the body drops, he is nowhere to be found. Your wife isn't his partner. She is his shield." Donald stared at the screen. The faces of the other women looked just like Glenda. Sharp, professional, confident. Now they were ruined. "So she is going to jail?" Donald asked. "If this pension fund thing blows up?" "Yeah. She is looking at 10 to 15 years for securities fraud. And since she is moving money into offshore accounts, it looks like she is profiting from it. That destroys any 'I was just following orders' defense. It makes her look like the mastermind." Donald felt a chill run down his spine. Glenda had set herself up perfectly. In her greed to hide money from Donald, she had created the paper trail that would convict her. "What do I do?" Donald asked. "If I confront her, she will run. Or she will warn David, and they will destroy the evidence and pin it all on me somehow." Vince shook his head. "Do not confront her. Not yet. We need leverage. We need to prove that David is the one pulling the strings. We need to find the other victims." Vince leaned forward. "And we need to secure your assets. If she goes down, the feds are going to seize everything. The house, the cars, your savings. Because her name is on them. You need to separate yourself financially and fast." "How?" Donald asked. Vince grinned, a sharp, predatory look. "You need a lawyer, a shark of your own. I know a guy. He is nasty, he is mean, and he hates David Sterling. But he costs money. A retainer is usually $5,000. Donald reached into his pocket. He pulled out the envelope containing the check from the school grant. He had cashed it the day before, keeping the cash hidden in his glove box, intending to use it for the romantic weekend. He placed the stack of $100 bills on the desk. $5,000. I have the money, Donald said. Vince raised an eyebrow. Teacher's salary? Merit bonus, Donald said flatly. For historical preservation. I guess I am preserving my own history now. Vince nodded. All right, I will call the lawyer. We meet him tomorrow. For now, you go home. You go back to that house, you make that salad, and you smile. You be the best, dumbest husband in the world. You let her think she is winning, because when someone thinks they have already won, they stop looking at the map. Donald stood up. He felt lighter despite the weight of the situation. He had a plan. He had allies. He drove home, his mind shifting gears. He wasn't sad anymore. He wasn't even angry in the hot, burning way he had been. He was cold. He was calculating. He pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting. He unlocked the front door and went into the kitchen. He washed the salad greens. He chopped the cucumbers. He set the table. At 6:15, the garage door opened. It stuck halfway, groaned, and then opened fully. Glenda's car pulled in. Donald stood by the counter, wiping his hands on a towel. He heard her heels on the steps. The door opened. Glenda walked in. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright, manic with the energy of her secret life. She was carrying her suitcase. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag. God, what a drive. Traffic was a nightmare. She walked over to him. She smelled of the hotel soap, the same soap he had smelled in the lobby. She leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. "Did you have a good weekend?" she asked, her voice light, casual. Donald looked at her. He looked at the woman who was stealing his money, sleeping with her boss, and unknowingly signing her own prison sentence. He saw the predator, and he saw the victim. He smiled. It was a warm, gentle smile. The mask was perfect. "I did," he said. "I got a lot of grading done, and I fixed the leak in the bathroom. How was the seminar? Did you learn a lot?" Glenda laughed, walking to the fridge to get a water. "Oh, you know, lots of boring speeches, corporate strategy. But it was productive. David thinks we are really going to crush the next quarter." "I bet he does," Donald said. "I bet he does." He turned back to the salad, the knife slicing through a red tomato with a sharp, clean cut. "Dinner is ready," he said. They sat down to eat. Glenda talked about the lectures she had attended. She fabricated stories about colleagues Donald had never met. She spun a web of lies so intricate it was almost impressive. Donald listened, nodding at the right times, asking the right simple questions. "That sounds complicated, honey. You are so smart to understand all that. I am glad they appreciate you." Inside, he was recording every word. He was building his case. As they finished eating, Glenda's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and quickly flipped it over. "Work?" Donald asked. "Yeah, just a reminder for a morning meeting," she said. She stood up. "I am going to hop in the shower. I feel gross from the travel." "Go ahead," Donald said. "I will do the dishes." She walked out of the room. Donald waited until he heard the water running upstairs. He walked over to her purse, which she had left on the counter. He opened it. He didn't find the burner phone. She must have it with her in the bathroom. But he found something else, a receipt. It was crumbled up at the bottom of the bag. He smoothed it out. It was from a jewelry store near the resort. A purchase made yesterday afternoon. Men's Rolex watch. Model, Submariner. Price, $12,500. Payment method, credit card ending in 4498. Donald checked the photo on his phone. Card 4498 was the one in his name, the one with the $50,000 debt. She had bought David a Rolex, and she had made Donald pay for it. Donald stared at the receipt. The audacity was breathtaking. She was gifting her lover with her husband's stolen credit. He folded the receipt carefully and put it in his pocket. Another piece of evidence. Another nail in the coffin. He heard the shower turn off upstairs. He turned back to the sink and started scrubbing a plate. He hummed a little tune. The investigation was over. He knew everything he needed to know about the money, the affair, and the character of his wife. Now it was time for the alliance. It was time to find the others. It was time to widen the circle. Donald dried his hands. He looked out the window at the dark backyard. "You enjoyed the pancakes, Glenda," he thought. "I hope you did, because the bill is coming due. And it is going to be very, very expensive." He turned off the kitchen light. and walked into the darkness of the hallway, ready for war. Monday morning broke with a grey steel sky that matched the colour of the suit worn by Arthur Blackwood. Blackwood was the lawyer Vince had recommended, a man whose reputation in the city was somewhere between a legal genius and a circling shark. His office was not in a strip mall. It was in a glass tower downtown, overlooking the very financial district where Glenda and David played their games. Donald sat across from him at a mahogany table that was likely worth more than Donald's car. Vince sat to his right, looking out of place, but entirely comfortable in his leather jacket. Blackwood adjusted his rimless glasses and tapped the stack of papers Donald had provided. The silence in the room was heavy. "This is not a divorce case, Mr. Evans," Blackwood said, his voice dry and precise. "This is a criminal conspiracy dossier. Your wife has effectively turned your marriage into a money laundering operation. The credit card debt is the least of your worries. The offshore transfers linked to the pension fund volatility, that is federal prison time." Donald nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I know. That is why I am here. I don't just want a divorce. I want to be clear of the blast radius when this explodes. And I want them stopped." Blackwood smiled, a thin, razor-sharp expression. "We can do more than stop them, we can dismantle them. But we need a synchronized strike. If we file for divorce today, she will be alerted. She will shred documents. She will warn Sterling. We need to hit them on all fronts simultaneously. The assets, the reputation, and the criminal charges. We need more leverage," Vince added, leaning forward. "The paper trail is good, but juries like faces. They like victims. I tracked down Sarah Jenkins." "The former CFO?" Donald asked. "The one David ruined 5 years ago." "She is working as a shift manager at a diner in Jersey," Vince said grimly. "She lost her license. She lost her house. I reached out to her yesterday. She was hesitant, but when I told her we had proof of Sterling's current scheme, she agreed to talk. She has saved emails, Donald. Old ones. Ones that prove Sterling gives the orders but never signs the paper." "Bring her in," Blackwood said. "We will depose her. Her testimony establishes a pattern of behavior. It proves your wife is being groomed as the fall guy, just like Sarah was. It protects you from being seen as complicit." "But that is not enough to kill the king," Blackwood continued, standing up and walking to the window. "David Sterling survives because he has money and he has social shielding. His wife, Eleanor Sterling, is on the board of the City Opera. She controls the family's philanthropic image. She is the reason he is still acceptable in polite society, despite the rumors." Donald looked up. "You think she knows?" "She knows he is a cheater," Blackwood said. "Everyone knows that. But she probably doesn't know he is risking the family fortune on illegal pension swaps. And she definitely doesn't know he is financing his mistresses with company funds that could be traced back to her own estate." "We need to talk to her," Donald said, the idea forming rapidly in his mind. Vince shook his head. "You can't just walk up to Eleanor Sterling. She lives in a fortress." "I can't," Donald agreed, "but a concerned teacher who found something disturbing involving her husband. Maybe." Donald spent the afternoon preparing. He wasn't grading papers. He was rehearsing the most important lecture of his life. Vince used his contacts to find out Eleanor's schedule. She was due to inspect a floral arrangement at the Botanical Gardens for an upcoming charity gala at 3 o'clock. Donald arrived at the gardens at 2:45. He wore his best suit, the one he wore for parent-teacher conferences. He held a manila envelope. He waited near the orchid pavilion. At 3 sharp, a limousine pulled up. A woman stepped out. Eleanor Sterling was in her 60s, elegant with hair like spun silver and a posture that commanded respect. She was flanked by an assistant, but she walked alone, inspecting the flowers with a critical eye. Donald took a deep breath. He stepped into her path. "Mrs. Sterling." She stopped and looked at him. Her gaze was cool, imperious. She didn't look at him with disdain, but rather with the detachment one might show a statue. "I am sorry I don't accept solicitations," she said, turning away. "I am not asking for money," Donald said, his voice steady. "My name is Donald Evans. My wife is Glenda Evans. She works for your husband." Eleanor stopped. She turned back slowly. A flicker of recognition passed through her eyes. She knew the name. Of course she did. She likely knew the names of all the women. "Mr. Evans," she said, her voice dropping a few degrees. I am afraid I don't get involved in my husband's personnel matters. If you have a grievance, call the HR department. It is not a personnel matter, Donald said, stepping closer but maintaining a respectful distance. It is a financial one, and it involves the safety of your own assets. He held out the envelope. Inside this envelope is a receipt for a Rolex Submariner bought 2 days ago with a credit card in my name, but the watch is on your husband's wrist. There are also bank statements showing transfers from Sterling Capital to an offshore shell company that lists your home address as the registered agent. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She looked at the envelope, then at Donald. She saw the pain in his eyes, but she also saw the steel. She gestured for her assistant to step back. She took the envelope. She opened it with gloved hands. She looked at the receipt. She looked at the bank transfer document. Her expression didn't change, but her knuckles turned white. He used the Hamptons address, she whispered, more to herself than to Donald. That idiot used the Hamptons address for a shell corporation. She looked up at Donald. Why are you bringing this to me? Why not the police? Because the police will freeze everything, Donald said, including your personal accounts. I thought you might want a head start. I am going to the authorities tomorrow morning, Mrs. Sterling. I'm going to expose the affair, the theft and the fraud. I just wanted you to know that your husband isn't just cheating on you. He is stealing from you. Eleanor closed the envelope. She tapped it against her palm. You seem like a decent man, Mr. Evans, she said quietly. It is a shame decent men are so often treated like collateral damage. She put the envelope in her purse. Tomorrow morning, you said? Yes, ma'am. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Thank you for the information. I will ensure my lawyers are prepared. Good day, Mr. Evans. She walked away, her back straighter than before. Donald watched her go. He hadn't asked for her help. He hadn't asked for an alliance. He had simply handed her the knife. He knew with absolute certainty that she would use it. Donald returned to Blackwood's office. Vince was there, grinning. Sarah is on board, Vince said. She gave us a sworn affidavit. She also gave us the name of the journalist who covered her firing, a guy named Miller at the City Chronicle. He hates Sterling. He has been waiting for a scoop like this for years. We have the victims, Blackwood said, ticking them off on his fingers. We have the wife. We have the evidence. Now, we need the trigger. Donald checked his watch. It was 5:30. Glenda would be leaving work soon. I have to go home, Donald said. I have to play the part one last time. He drove home, his stomach churning. This was the hardest part, the deception. He had to look into the eyes of the woman he had loved for 5 years and lie to her face, just as she had lied to him. When he entered the house, Glenda was already there. She was in the living room, sipping a glass of wine. She looked radiant, energized by the adrenaline of her double life. But there was something else in her demeanor today. A sharpness, a predatory anticipation. Hey, stranger, she said, smiling. You are home late. Just some meetings at school, Donald said, putting his bag down. Budget cuts. You know how it is. Glenda sighed, walking over to him. She didn't kiss him. She patted his arm. You work so hard for so little, Donald, she said, shaking her head. It really isn't fair. You deserve more. The irony almost made him laugh. Instead, he looked at her with wide, innocent eyes. I have enough, Glenda. I have you. I have this house. Glenda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, brighter and falser than before. Actually, speaking of the house, she said, walking back to the coffee table. She picked up a blue folder. David and I were looking at the market trends. The housing bubble is about to burst, Donald. We are sitting on a lot of equity here, but if the market crashes, we lose it all. Donald's heart began to hammer. Here it comes. So David suggested we restructure the asset, she continued, her voice smooth as silk. Protect the equity. I had the legal team draw up a transfer. We moved the deed into a holding trust. It protects us from liability and locks in the value. I just need you to sign here. She held out a pen. Donald looked at the document. It was a quitclaim deed. It transferred his ownership of the house to Evans Sterling Trust. If he signed this, he would be signing away his half of the house. She was trying to evict him from his own life before she even served the divorce papers. He looked at her. She was watching him closely, her eyes searching for any sign of hesitation. Donald took the pen. He felt the weight of it. You think this is the best move? he asked, looking worried. "It is the only move, sweetie," she said. "Trust me. I am the finance expert, remember? I am doing this for us. For us." Donald lowered the pen to the paper. He could refuse. He could scream. But Blackwood had told him to keep her calm. If he refused, she would know something was up. He needed to buy 12 hours. He looked at the signature line, then he looked at his hand. He let the pen drop. "Oh, shoot," Donald said, flexing his fingers. "My hand is cramping up. I've been writing on the chalkboard all day." He picked the pen up again, but his hand shook. "You know what, honey," he said, looking at the document. "This needs a witness, doesn't it? It says right here, notary public required." Glenda frowned. "I can get it notarized at the office tomorrow. Just sign it." "I don't think that is legal, Glenda," Donald said, putting on his best rule-following teacher voice. "If the date doesn't match the notary stamp, it could void the whole trust. We don't want to risk the equity, do we?" Glenda looked annoyed. She tapped her foot. "Fine," she snapped. "You are so pedantic sometimes. I will take it to the bank tomorrow morning on my lunch break," Donald promised, picking up the folder. "I will get it notarized and bring it to you. That way it is airtight." Glenda hesitated. She wanted that signature now. But she also believed Donald was a fool who followed rules. She believed she had him completely under control. "Okay," she said, finishing her wine, "but do it first thing. It is urgent." "I promise," Donald said, "first thing in the morning." He took the folder. He had just stolen the weapon from her hand. They spent the rest of the evening in a strange, suffocating dance. Glenda talked about a business trip she had to take to Paris next month. She asked Donald if he had ever been to Paris. He said no. She said, "Maybe one day you will go," with the tone of someone talking to a child about Santa Claus. They went to bed at 10. Donald lay in the dark, listening to her breathe. She fell asleep instantly, the sleep of the arrogant and the unburdened. Donald lay awake, watching the red numbers on the alarm clock change. 11 p.m. 1 a.m. 3 a.m. At 4 a.m., he slipped out of bed. He moved silently. He went to the closet and packed a small bag. He didn't take much, just his clothes, his laptop, and the folder with the unsigned deed. He went downstairs. He wrote a note and left it on the kitchen counter. It wasn't a long note. It wasn't an explanation. "Glenda, I didn't go to the bank. I went to the lawyer." "Donald." He walked out the front door and into the cool morning air. Vince was waiting in his car at the end of the block. The engine was idling. "Ready?" Vince asked as Donald got in. Donald looked back at the house one last time. It was dark and silent. Inside, Glenda was sleeping, dreaming of her bonus and her penthouse life. She had no idea that the sun was about to rise on a scorched earth. "I am ready," Donald said. Vince put the car in gear. "It is D-Day, Donnie," Vince said. Donald pulled out his phone. He sent a single text message to Blackwood. "The package is secure. Execute." As they drove away, the first light of dawn began to bleed into the sky. It was a red dawn, a warning to sailors, and a warning to Glenda Evans. The teacher had left the building. The storm was here. Glenda woke up to the sound of silence. It was 7 in the morning, and usually the smell of coffee or the sound of the shower would be drifting in from the hallway. But today the house felt heavy and still. She sat up and stretched, feeling a lingering annoyance that Donald hadn't woken her up with a kiss or breakfast. He was usually so attentive, bordering on clingy, and she had grown used to his servitude. She walked downstairs in her silk robe, expecting to find him in the kitchen. The kitchen was empty. The coffee pot was cold and empty. The only thing on the pristine granite counter was a single piece of lined notebook paper. She picked it up. Her eyes scanned the 2 sentences written in Donald's neat teacher handwriting. "I didn't go to the bank. I went to the lawyer." Glenda stared at the paper. Her brain refused to process the words. Donald didn't go to lawyers. Donald went to the grocery store. Donald graded papers. Donald fixed leaky faucets. He didn't have the spine for lawyers. She laughed nervously, a short, sharp sound in the empty kitchen. It had to be a joke. A passive-aggressive protest, because she had pushed him about the deed. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. "You have reached Donald. Leave a message." She hung up and dialed again. Voicemail. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of her neck. She looked at the time. 7:15. She had to be at the office by 8:30 for the pre-market meeting with David. She couldn't deal with Donald's temper tantrum right now. She would text him later. She would apologize, buy him a new watch or something, and smooth it over. He always came around. She dressed quickly, choosing her most aggressive red power suit. She needed to feel invincible today. She applied her makeup with precision, hiding the dark circles from the late nights and the stress. As she drove to the city, she convinced herself that everything was fine. Donald was just venting. He would be home with dinner ready by the time she returned. She pulled into the underground garage of Sterling Capital. Her reserved spot was right next to the elevator. She walked into the lobby, her heels clicking on the marble with authority. She nodded to the security guard, but he didn't nod back. He looked down at his console, avoiding her eyes. That was strange. She rode the elevator to the top floor. The executive suite was usually buzzing with quiet, focused energy. Today it felt like the air before a thunderstorm. People were gathered in small clusters, whispering. When they saw her coming, they scattered, diving back into their cubicles or burying their faces in phones. Glenda frowned. She walked straight to her office. Her assistant, a young woman named Jessica, was standing by the desk looking pale and terrified. "Jessica, where is the coffee?" Glenda asked, dropping her bag. "And get me the file on the merger." Jessica didn't move. She held up a tablet, her hand trembling. "Miss Evans, have you seen the news?" "What news?" Glenda snapped, snatching the tablet. It was the homepage of the City Chronicle. The headline was in bold black letters that seemed to scream off the screen. "The Sterling Scheme: How a Wall Street Predator Grooms Executives for Fraud." Below the headline was a picture. It wasn't just a picture of David. It was a picture of Glenda. It was a candid shot taken from the company website, placing her right next to him. Glenda's knees went weak. She sat down heavily in her chair. She read the first paragraph. "In an exclusive investigation, the Chronicle has uncovered a massive pension fund fraud ring, orchestrated by David Sterling, CEO of Sterling Capital. Documents provided by whistleblowers reveal a pattern of offshore laundering shell companies and the systematic use of junior executives as liability shields. The current operation, allegedly overseen by Vice President Glenda Evans, involves the theft of millions in teacher pension assets." Teacher pension assets. Donald. The room spun. She couldn't breathe. Donald didn't just go to a lawyer. He went to the press. He knew. He knew everything. Her office door flew open. David Sterling stormed in. He looked wild. His tie was crooked, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. "Did you do this?" David roared, slamming his hand on her desk. "Did you leak this?" Glenda stood up, her voice shaking. "Me? Are you insane? They named me David. They said I oversaw it. Who else has access to the Cayman files, Glenda?" David screamed. "Only you and me." "And I certainly didn't call the newspaper on myself." Before Glenda could answer, a commotion erupted in the hallway. The heavy glass doors of the main entrance were pushed open. 4 men in dark suits walked in, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. Leading them was a tall, sharp-faced man holding a stack of papers. It was Arthur Blackwood. The office fell into dead silence. Every phone seemed to stop ringing at once. The staff stood up in their cubicles to watch. Blackwood walked straight to Glenda's office. He didn't look at David, he looked at Glenda. "Glenda Evans?" he asked, his voice projecting across the room. "Yes," she whispered. "You are hereby served with a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial fraud," Blackwood said, thrusting a thick envelope into her chest. She instinctively grabbed it. "And," Blackwood continued, turning to the man beside him who flashed a federal badge, "this is a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices and files related to the Evans Sterling Trust and the Consulting Solutions LLC." David stepped back, trying to distance himself from her. "This is a misunderstanding," David said, putting on his CEO's smile, though it looked like a rictus of terror. "Glenda here has obviously been acting without my full supervision. If there are irregularities in her accounts, the company will cooperate fully." Glenda stared at him. The betrayal was so sudden, so absolute. It felt like a physical blow. "Without your supervision?" Glenda screeched. "You gave the orders. You sent the emails." "I never signed anything, Glenda," David said coldly. His eyes were dead. He was cutting her loose. He was doing exactly what Donald had heard him say he would do. He was discarding the pet. Suddenly, the elevator doors pinged open again. This time, it wasn't police. It was Eleanor Sterling. She walked into the office like a queen entering a battlefield. She was flanked by 2 corporate lawyers and the head of building security. She walked right past Glenda, ignoring her completely, and stopped in front of David. "Eleanor, honey, listen," David started, reaching for her. "This is a hit piece. We can fix this." "Don't touch me," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a guillotine blade. "I have just finished an emergency call with the board of directors," Eleanor announced to the room. "Effective immediately, David Sterling is removed as CEO pending an internal investigation. Security, please escort Mr. Sterling from the building." David's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. I built this company." "My family money built this company, David," Eleanor said, her eyes like ice. "And you used that money to buy watches for your staff and pay for hotel rooms. I have seen the credit card statements. I have seen the transfer logs." She turned to the head of security. "Take his badge and take hers," she added, gesturing vaguely at Glenda. David looked at Glenda. For a second, they shared a look of mutual destruction. The partners in crime, the power couple, the visionaries. They were nothing now, just 2 people standing in the wreckage of their own greed. 2 security guards grabbed David by the arms. He started shouting, cursing, threatening to sue everyone. They dragged him out of the office, his expensive Italian shoes dragging on the carpet. Glenda stood alone. The police officers moved in. "Ms. Evans, we need you to step away from the computer," one of the officers said. She grabbed her purse. She grabbed her phone. She stumbled out of the office, past the staring eyes of her colleagues. The people she had bossed around, the people she had looked down on, were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. She made it to the elevator. She pressed the button frantically. When the doors closed, she collapsed against the wall. She was hyperventilating. It was over. The career, the money, the reputation. It was all gone in 10 minutes, but surely Donald wouldn't leave her like this. Not really. He loved her. He was obsessed with her. He was just hurt. If she could talk to him, if she could explain that David manipulated her, that she was a victim too, he would help her. He would testify for her. He would save her. She ran to her car in the parking garage. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped her keys twice. She got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. She dialed Donald again. "Pick up, pick up, pick up," she begged. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then there was a click. "Donald?" she gasped, tears finally spilling over. "Donald, oh my God, you have to help me. It is a nightmare. The police are here. David fired me. They are saying I stole money. You know I wouldn't do that, Donald. You know me." There was a silence on the other end. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a listening silence. "Donald, please," she sobbed. "David tricked me, he used me. I need you to come to the station and tell them I am a good person. We can fix this. I will sign whatever you want. I will quit the job. We can just be us again. Please, honey, say something." On the other side of the line, Donald stood on the balcony of Vince's office, looking out at the city skyline. The wind ruffled his hair. He looked calm. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy weight he had been carrying for miles. He held the phone to his ear and listened to the woman who had called him a pet. He listened to the woman who had planned to discard him like trash when her bonus check cleared. He heard the fear in her voice, but he also heard the manipulation. Even now she was trying to use him. She wasn't sorry she did it. She was sorry she got caught. "Glenda," Donald said. His voice was not the warm, eager voice she knew. It was flat. It was final. "Donald, thank God," she cried. "Where are you?" "I saw the receipt, Glenda," he said. "What?" she stammered. "The Rolex. The Submariner. You bought it with my credit card. You gave it to him." Glenda froze. The air in the car seemed to vanish. "Donald, I can explain." "And I heard you," he interrupted. "At the Grand Oak Resort. I was outside the door. I heard you call me a pet. I heard you tell him you were waiting for the bonus to leave me." The silence on the line was deafening. There were no more excuses. There was no more room for lies. The truth hung between them, naked and ugly. "Donald," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I loved you, Glenda," Donald said. "I would have done anything for you. I was happy with our life. But you wanted more. Well, now you have more. You have a federal investigation. You have a media scandal. And you have a divorce." "No, Donald, don't do this," she screamed, panic taking over again. "You can't leave me alone in this. They will destroy me. You destroyed yourself, he said. Donald, please. I love you. He pulled the phone away from his ear. He looked at the screen. He saw her name. For the first time in 5 years, seeing her name didn't make him smile. It made him feel nothing. I know everything, Glenda, he said, delivering the final strike. Talk to my lawyer. He tapped the red button. The call ended. He turned off his phone. He turned to Vince and Blackwood, who were watching him with respectful silence. It is done, Donald said. Vince nodded. The police are picking up David at the curb. Eleanor just froze the joint assets. The press is running with the story. It is a clean sweep. Donald took a deep breath. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel happy. Revenge wasn't sweet. It was just necessary. It was like cauterizing a wound. It hurt, but it stopped the bleeding. He looked at his watch. It was 10 in the morning. The rest of his life was waiting. Let's go, Donald said. I have a class to teach. Back in the parking garage, Glenda stared at her silent phone. The screen went black. She looked up and saw a police cruiser pulling into the garage, its lights flashing silently in the gloom. They were looking for her car. She slumped against the steering wheel and closed her eyes. She thought about the pancakes. She thought about the simple, boring life she had despised. She thought about the man who had waited for her with flowers. And as the police officer tapped on her window, she realized that she had been the rich one all along, and she had thrown it all away for fool's gold. She unlocked the door and stepped out to meet her fate, completely and utterly alone. 6 months had passed since the morning the police cars surrounded the Sterling Capitol building. The seasons had changed, turning the lush green of the suburbs into a tapestry of brown and gold fallen leaves. The air was crisp and cold, signaling the approach of winter. For Donald Evans, the change in seasons mirrored the change in his own life. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was altered but clean. He sat in the back of the courtroom, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He was not there as a defendant. He was not there as a witness. He was there as an observer, a historian, witnessing the end of an empire. At the front of the room, Glenda stood before the judge. She looked nothing like the woman who had walked out of their house that final morning in her red power suit. The months of pre-trial detention and the stress of the investigation had hollowed her out. Her hair, once dyed and styled to perfection, was dull and pulled back in a simple ponytail, showing streaks of grey she had always hidden. She wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. She looked small. She looked fragile. But it was her eyes that told the real story. They were darting around the room, scanning the faces in the gallery. When they landed on Donald, they stopped. She offered him a tentative, trembling smile, a desperate plea for recognition. She was looking for the husband who used to make her pancakes. She was looking for the safety net. Donald did not smile back. He did not frown either. He simply looked at her with the detached curiosity of a man watching a stranger. He saw her for what she was, a tragedy of her own making. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the paperwork. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, broken only by the scratching of the court reporter's machine. Glenda Evans, the judge, said, his voice booming without a microphone. You have been found guilty on 3 counts of securities fraud, 1 count of embezzlement, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. The evidence against you is overwhelming, including digital records, bank transfers, and the testimony of your co-conspirators. Glenda flinched at the word co-conspirators. David Sterling had not gone down with the ship. True to his nature, he had grabbed the only life raft available. He had cut a deal with the federal prosecutors. In exchange for a reduced sentence at a minimum security facility, he had testified that Glenda was the mastermind behind the pension fund scheme. He claimed she had manipulated the data to impress him, and that he had been too trusting. It was a lie, of course, a magnificent, dazzling lie, but David had the high-priced lawyers to sell it, and Glenda had signed every single document. The judge continued. While the court acknowledges your claim that you were acting under the influence of a superior officer, the fact remains that you personally profited from these crimes. You transferred stolen funds into offshore accounts. You used corporate assets for personal luxury. You attempted to defraud your own spouse of his rightful property. This speaks to a character of deep moral failing. Glenda lowered her head, sobbing quietly. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 5 years, the judge declared. He banged the gavel. The sound rang out like a gunshot, ending the life Glenda had known. 2 bailiffs moved in. They handcuffed her wrists behind her back. As they led her away, she turned her head one last time toward Donald. "Donald," she mouthed. "I am sorry." Donald watched her disappear through the side door. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. He waited for the anger. He waited for the satisfaction. But there was neither. There was only a quiet sense of closure. The book was closed. The lesson was over. He stood up and buttoned his coat. Arthur Blackwood was waiting for him in the lobby. The lawyer looked pleased. "That went as well as could be expected," Blackwood said, shaking Donald's hand. "With the criminal case concluded, the civil divorce settlement is finalized. Since she is incarcerated and owes restitution, the judge granted our motion. You get the house free and clear, you keep your pension. And the debt she racked up in your name has been transferred entirely to her estate, which is currently being liquidated by the government." "She has nothing left?" Donald asked. Blackwood nodded. "Nothing. The government seized the offshore accounts. Eleanor Sterling sued her for the unauthorized company spending and won whatever was left. Glenda is bankrupt. When she gets out in 5 years, she will be starting from 0. Actually, less than 0. She will be a felon with a massive restitution bill." Donald walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, cold sunlight. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the clean air. He felt lighter than he had in years. He drove home. The house looked different now. During the last few months he had been busy. He had hired contractors with the money he had saved since separating his finances. He had repainted the exterior, changing the color from the sterile grey, Glenda-like, to a warm, welcoming blue. He had torn out the thorny rose bushes she had planted in the front yard and replaced them with hydrangeas. He walked inside. The interior was different too. The expensive, uncomfortable leather furniture was gone sold to pay for the renovations. In its place were comfortable armchairs and bookshelves, walls of bookshelves. He had turned the living room into a library filled with history books, biographies and novels. It was a room meant for living, not for impressing guests. He walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops were still there, but the cold, sterile vibe was gone. There was a bowl of fresh apples on the table. The smell of cinnamon and coffee hung in the air. He went to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. As he popped the cap, there was a knock at the door. Donald frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. He walked to the door and opened it. Standing on his porch was a woman he hadn't seen since the day at the Botanical Gardens. Eleanor Sterling. She was dressed impeccably in a wool coat and a silk scarf, but she looked tired. The scandal had taken a toll on her as well, even though she had survived it with her fortune intact. "Mr. Evans," she said, offering a small, polite smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Donald said, stepping back. "Please come in." She walked into the hallway, looking around at the new decor. "It looks warm," she said. "A home." "Can I get you some tea?" Donald asked. "That would be lovely," she said. They sat in the new library holding steaming mugs. It was a strange pair, the billionaire heiress and the high school history teacher, but they were bound together by the wreckage their spouses had created. "I wanted to stop by personally," Eleanor said, setting her cup down, "to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Donald said. "I did what I had to do." "You saved me a great deal of embarrassment," Eleanor corrected, "and a great deal of money. If you hadn't brought me that evidence when you did, David would have drained the family trust completely. He was planning to run, you know, to Belize. He had the tickets bought." Donald raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know that." "He was going to leave Glenda behind to take the fall regardless," Eleanor said. "That is the kind of man he is. That is the kind of man I stayed with for 30 years to protect my image." She looked at Donald with a newfound respect. "You were smarter than I was, Mr. Evans. You saw the rot and you cut it out immediately. You didn't let it fester." "I had help," Donald said, thinking of Vince and Blackwood. "I also wanted to tell you," Eleanor continued, reaching into her bag, "that as part of my restructuring of the company, I have set up a new charitable foundation. We are focusing on educational grants, specifically for history and humanities." She placed a brochure on the coffee table. "We are looking for board members, people with integrity, people who understand the importance of learning from the past so we don't repeat it. I would be honored if you would consider joining. It comes with a stipend, of course, but more importantly, it would give you a platform to do the work you care about on a larger scale." Donald looked at the brochure. The Sterling Evans Initiative for Historical Preservation. She had put his name on it. I don't know what to say, Donald stammered. Say yes, Eleanor said, standing up. You are a good man, Donald. The world needs more good men in positions of power. Do not let what they did to you make you small. Let it make you bigger. She extended her hand. Donald took it. Her grip was firm. I will see you at the first board meeting next month, Eleanor said. She left, leaving Donald alone in his library. He picked up the brochure, a board member, a decision-maker. He wasn't just a teacher anymore. He was a leader. Later that evening, Donald sat on his back porch watching the sunset. The sky was a bruised purple fading into black. He had a fire going in the fire pit he had built himself. The flames danced and crackled, casting long shadows across the yard. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Vince. Saw the news about the verdict. Justice served. Drinks on me this weekend? Donald smiled and typed back. You are on. He put the phone down. He thought about the journey of the last 6 months. He thought about the moment he stood outside that hotel room door, paralyzed by the sound of betrayal. He thought about the pain that had threatened to consume him. It would have been so easy to kick down that door. It would have been so easy to scream and fight and let his anger drive him. But if he had done that, he would have lost. Glenda would have spun the story. David would have crushed him. He would have been the crazy ex-husband left with nothing but bitterness. Instead, he had chosen a different path, the path of the historian. He had gathered his facts. He had studied his enemy. He had waited for the right moment to strike. And because of that, he had won. Not just the house, not just the lawsuit. He had won his dignity. He thought about Glenda sitting in her cell tonight. He wondered if she finally understood. She had chased money and status thinking they were the keys to happiness. She had treated people like objects to be used and discarded. She had underestimated the quiet man who graded papers because she mistook his kindness for weakness. But kindness isn't weakness. Kindness is a choice. And when that kindness is betrayed, the resolve that lies beneath it is stronger than any corporate strategy or offshore account. Donald stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The air was cold, biting at his skin, but it made him feel alive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was the velvet box containing the sapphire necklace he had bought for Glenda on that fateful day. He had kept it in his glove box all this time, a reminder of the fool he used to be. He opened the box. The blue stone glittered in the firelight. It was beautiful, it was expensive, it was a lie. He didn't want to sell it, he didn't want the money from it. It felt tainted. He walked over to the fire pit. He looked at the necklace one last time. Goodbye, Glenda, he whispered. He tossed the necklace into the heart of the fire. He watched as the velvet box caught flame, turning black and curling into ash. The silver chain glowed red-hot, then melted, losing its shape. The sapphire sat among the coals, a cold, unfeeling stone amidst the heat. Donald turned his back on the fire. He walked back into his warm blue house. He locked the door behind him, not to keep the world out, but to secure the peace he had built within. He went to the kitchen and began to prepare dinner. He was making pancakes, not for a wife who didn't appreciate them, not for a partner who was rushing to leave him. He was making them for himself. He whisked the batter, the rhythmic sound filling the quiet kitchen. He heated the skillet. He poured the batter and watched it bubble. He flipped the pancake. It was perfect. Golden brown and fluffy. He sat down at the table, his table in his house. He poured the syrup. He took a bite. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. Donald Evans was alone, but he was not lonely. He was free. And as he sat there savoring the simple sweetness of his victory, he knew that his history was just beginning.